I never saw fit to inform my daughter's aristocratic suitor that for 30 years, I served as the crown's high marshal, hunting down the most treacherous wolves across the continent. To an arrogant young lord like Julian Whitcomb, I was merely a frail, aging country gentleman who drove a squeaky, rusted carriage and spent his autumn years tending to apple orchards. He believed my quiet nature was weakness. He thought his vast inherited fortune, his gilded lineage, and his corrupt connections made him untouchable. And so, he made a fatal mistake. He threatened my family. He stood in his grand parlor and declared that if my daughter ever dared to end her betrothal and leave his side, he would ruin her name across the high society of London, seize every penny she possessed, and burn my family's ancestral estate to the ground. But my daughter left him anyway. And when he sent his hired men into the dead of night to enforce his dark promises, he had no idea that my wife and I were sitting calmly on the stone terrace, waiting for him in the shadow of the moon. But before I unveil how this dangerous confrontation unfolded, take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments below where you are listening from. After all, a father's protective instinct does not fade simply because he lays down his badge. The urgent letter from my daughter Adeline arrived precisely at 2 in the afternoon. It contained only 5 frantic words: "Dad, please come at once." When a child sends a message like that, you do not pause to ask questions or send polite inquiries. You move. I grabbed my leather gloves, stepped out to the cobblestone courtyard, and mounted my reliable old carriage. Pushing the horses as hard as safety allowed, I made the journey into the capital in record time. Lord Julian lived in one of those suffocatingly opulent marble townhouses in the heart of Mayfair, where the footmen wore powdered wigs and looked upon honest working men as if they were dirt clinging to the pavement. I parked my battered carriage right in the primary unloading bay, completely ignoring the manic waving of the head butler. As I limped slightly through the gilded foyer, I intentionally stooped my shoulders forward, allowing myself to appear smaller, older, and thoroughly defeated. It is astonishing how utterly invisible a man becomes when the world presumes he is nothing more than a fragile, harmless old fool. Taking the grand staircase to the private wing, I found the polished mahogany door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I stepped into a room filled with icy grandeur, and absolute chaos. Adeline was desperately shoving her velvet gowns into a single travel trunk, her hands trembling so violently she could scarcely fasten the brass latches. When she looked up, the raw, suffocating panic in my daughter's eyes made my chest tighten. She looked exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice cracking softly. "We must leave before Julian returns from his council meeting." I nodded slowly, playing the part of the slow, hesitant father. Shuffling forward, I took the heavy trunk from her trembling hands, letting my arms quiver just enough to perfect the illusion. "Let us go home, my child," I said gently. But as we stepped into the grand corridor, a cold voice echoed behind us. Lord Julian Whitcomb stood directly in our path, his tailored velvet coat gleaming under the chandelier light, holding a silver-headed cane. He was 35, insufferably arrogant, and oozing the unearned confidence of a man who had bought his way out of every reckoning. His cruel eyes locked onto Adeline's trunk, his lip curling into a sneer. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice dripping with venom. And in that very moment, a shift began that would change all our lives forever. Adeline froze instantly, stepping behind my body as if using me as a human shield against the storm. Julian let out a cold, mocking laugh that echoed down the marble hallway. He stepped closer, his polished boots clicking sharply against the stone floor, eyeing me with utter disgust. He did not see a threat standing before him, he saw only an old man in a faded coat holding a heavy travel bag. Stepping past me with shocking aggression, Julian grabbed Adeline's wrist in an iron grip. "You are going nowhere," he snapped, yanked her back toward him. She gasped, trying to pull free, but his grip only tightened. I stepped forward immediately, my hands deliberately trembling as I placed my fingers gently on his velvet cuff. "Please, my lord," I stammered, pitching my voice to sound frightened and frail. "Release her. We desire no quarrel with a nobleman of your stature." Julian shoved my hand away so forcefully that I stumbled backward against the wall. "You desire no trouble, old man," he sneered. "You dare step into my estate to steal what belongs to me. If she walks out those doors, I will freeze every asset tied to her name. I will drown your family in so much legal debt that you will be forced to sell your pitiful farm and beg for crusts in the gutter." He turned his back to bark orders at his servants, utterly convinced he had asserted his unquestioned dominance over a weak father and a broken woman. But as he turned away, I quietly ushered Adeline through the side exit and into our waiting carriage. Throwing the trunk into the back, I whipped the horses into a gallop, leaving Julian shouting threats from the marble steps. As we navigated the crowded city streets, Adeline finally broke down, burying her face in her hands. "Dad, I am so sorry," she sobbed. "He froze our joint accounts this morning. He kept the deeds to my personal carriage. He promised he would destroy everything we own if I dared to walk away. I have nothing left." I kept my gaze fixed on the road, driving smoothly through the afternoon traffic. I did not raise my voice. I did not curse Lord Julian's name. Instead, I analyzed the threat like the operative I had been for 30 years. Glancing in my side mirror, I noted a heavy black carriage with dark curtains pulled out from an alley 2 blocks behind us, matching my pace perfectly. When I turned down an side street, the carriage turned too. Julian had sent his personal hounds to track us. Adeline was detailing the psychological torment she had endured for 6 months, but my mind was operating on 2 distinct tracks. One side listened to my child, the other side mapped the terrain, calculated turning radiuses, and prepared an evasion route. Taking a sudden sharp turn down a narrow cobblestone lane, I did not speed up, speeding up signals panic to a tracker. Instead, I navigated through a labyrinth of delivery alleys, relying on muscle memory from decades of evasive operations. Within 10 minutes, utilizing blind turns and timed traffic jams, the trailing carriage was entirely lost in the city sprawl. Adeline never even realized we were being pursued. By nightfall, we reached our secluded estate in the northern countryside, surrounded by towering oak trees and heavy fog. My wife, Marlene, a former Crown prosecutor who knew the anatomy of a crisis better than anyone, was waiting on the stone terrace. She didn't ask questions. She took one look at Adeline's tear-stained face, wrapped her arms around our daughter, and led her inside to safety. But as I turned to follow, a stone suddenly shattered the library window, scattering glass across the floorboards. Wrapped around the heavy stone with twine was a parchment note. Unfolding it under the moonlight, I read 6 words written in thick black ink: "Send her back or it burns." But why was Lord Julian so utterly confident he could intimidate us? What he failed to realize was that he had just placed himself in the sights of a master predator. I stared at those threatening words for a long, unblinking moment before folding the paper neatly and slipping it into my pocket. Lord Julian believed he was terrorizing a helpless country gentleman. He thought he was playing a game he had already won. He had no earthly idea that he had crossed the path of a man who spent 3 decades bringing down warlords, cartel leaders, and high-ranking traitors. The following morning had barely broken over the misty oak trees when a heavy knock rattled the heavy oak doors of our estate. Adeline gasped, spilling her tea across the wooden table, her eyes wide with fresh terror. Marlene placed a firm hand on our daughter's shoulder while I walked calmly to the foyer. I did not need to check the window to know who stood outside. When wealthy, arrogant men fail at immediate physical intimidation, their next move is entirely predictable: they attempt to weaponize the legal system. Opening the door, I found a young parish magistrate standing on the porch, looking immensely uncomfortable while holding a heavy stack of official wax-sealed legal folders. He asked for Adeline, handing her the documents before retreating to his carriage without another word. Adeline carried the dense stack of legal parchment back to the dining table, her fingers trembling violently as she broke the red seals. As her eyes scanned the formal Latin legal terminology, her face drained of all color. Within seconds, her breathing became shallow, and a quiet, shattered sob escaped her lips. "Dad," she whispered, dropping the papers onto the floor as if they were burning coal. He is suing me. He is claiming I embezzled 50,000 sovereigns from his commercial shipping firm. I retrieved the documents from the floor and scanned the primary allegations. Lord Julian had officially accused my daughter of high financial theft from his luxury trading enterprise. The paperwork was meticulously structured, filled with falsified ledgers, altered bank drafts, and ruthless legal threats demanding immediate surrender or federal imprisonment. It bore the seal of Magistrate Halloran, a judge notorious throughout the county for siding with wealthy aristocrats who funded his election campaigns. Julian had not merely hired a ruthless solicitor, he had bought the local bench. "He is going to send me to a penal colony," Adeline cried, burying her face in her hands. "He told me he would do this. He said he would make it look like I was transferring funds out of his accounts. I never touched a single coin of his company's money, I swear it. But he has official documents, he has the magistrate, he has everything." Marlene drew our daughter close, murmuring gentle assurances, but I remained motionless. I offered no hollow promises or frantic comfort. I simply stared at the fresh ink on the parchment. Julian believed he had executed a masterstroke. He thought he had trapped us in a corner where surrender was our only salvation. Right on cue, a courier delivered a sealed letter to our servant. Opening it, I found a short message from Julian himself. "I told you I would ruin her, old man. Send her back to my townhome by nightfall, and the lawsuit vanishes. Continue this foolish rebellion, and she will spend the next 20 years in a cold stone cell." A normal father would have panicked. A normal father would have begged local authorities for intervention or surrendered his life savings to save his child. But I was not a normal father. I sat down directly across from my trembling daughter, resting my hands over hers. "Adeline, look at me," I said, my voice low, cold, and entirely steady. "You are not going to prison. You are not stepping into a courtroom. You will not pay this man a single copper coin, and you are certainly never returning to his side." "But the magistrate," she sobbed. "Paperwork burns, Adeline," I interrupted gently. "When a corrupt man fabricates financial records to frame an innocent person, he leaves a trail of digital and physical evidence. He believes he is using the law as a shield, but he has just handed us the very weapon we need to completely destroy his life. But how can we fight a lord with a corrupt judge in his pocket?" she asked. I offered her a faint, icy smile. "Because, my child, I know people who read these kind of fraudulent documents for amusement. And what Lord Julian does not know is that his arrogance has just opened the door to a sovereign storm." I stepped out of the dining room and walked down the quiet corridor to my private study, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The room smelled of old leather and oil, a sanctuary holding the artifacts of a life I thought I had left behind. Moving toward the far wall, I released a concealed spring behind a shelf of historical volumes. With a soft click, the bookcase swung open, revealing a steel-lined alcove containing a specialized, military-grade communications apparatus. I powered up the device, watching the green indicator lights glow to life. It was time to summon old allies. My first call routed directly to the London chambers of Sir Ellis Vance, now one of the most formidable corporate prosecutors in the realm, but 20 years ago, a terrified junior barrister whom I had saved from a syndicate assassin's blade. He owed me his life, and he had promised to answer whenever I called. "Ellis," I said smoothly when his voice echoed through the line. "It is Hollis Kerrigan." A long pause followed before Ellis spoke, his polished demeanor instantly replaced by the quiet reverence of a man who remembered who he was talking to. "Hollis," he breathed. "It has been many years. Are you and Marlene safe?" "We are safe," I replied. "But my daughter Adeline faces a forged legal attack from Lord Julian Whitcomb. He bought a local magistrate to endorse fraudulent embezzlement charges to force her back into his grip." "Send me a copy of the filing immediately," Ellis demanded, his voice hardening. "I will have a team of litigators dismantle it before sunset. We will countersue him for malicious prosecution and bury him in so many injunctions he won't be able to draw breath." "No," I answered coldly. The lawsuit is merely noise meant to cause panic. I do not play defense, Ellis. We are going straight for his throat. Tell me what you need, Hollis. I need you to pull every corporate registry, every tax ledger, and every foreign trade license associated with Whitcomb Shipping, I instructed. I want his financial existence dissected down to the last copper piece. Consider it done, Ellis replied. But if he is an established aristocrat, he likely utilizes shell entities to hide his true assets. We need someone who can look behind the curtain. I am handling that right now, I said. Gather the public filings, I will procure the shadow ledgers. Ending the call, I immediately dialed a second classified frequency, one that rerouted through the Sovereign Treasury's intelligence wing. The man who answered was Corbin, a veteran financial analyst who had spent 30 years tracking dark money for the Crown. Hollis Kerrigan, you old warhorse. Corbin chuckled through the line. I assumed you were sitting on a porch whittling walking sticks. I am taking a brief hiatus from retirement, Corbin, I replied softly. I require a shadow audit on Lord Julian Whitcomb. Corbin stopped laughing immediately, the rapid tapping of key levers taking its place. Give me a moment, Hollis. Looking at his primary accounts now. Something is deeply rotten here, Hollis. Define rotten, I said. He purports to run a luxury trade firm, Corbin explained, but his primary capital isn't originating from domestic banks or legitimate investors. He is receiving massive, continuous wire transfers from offshore accounts routed through private banks in Malta and the Caribbean. They are breaking the deposits down into smaller increments to bypass automatic crown flags. It is staggering volume, millions of gold sovereigns flowing into his firm for ships that do not even exist. He is washing dark money, I realized, the pieces connecting flawlessly. He is running a commercial washing machine for criminal syndicates. Precisely, Corbin confirmed. And these routing numbers flag directly back to an Eastern European crime cartel the Crown has been trying to dismantle for 5 years. Your boy Julian is merely a glorified middleman moving dirty money for monsters. A cold smile touched my lips. Julian believed he was a king because he wore tailored velvet and bought a local judge. In truth, he was nothing more than an expendable pawn for international criminals. And now, he was about to find out what happens when the board is swept clean. 3 hours later, Ellis called back with devastating news. Julian had not merely attempted to intimidate Adeline, he had systematically used her signature, forged on secondary corporate papers, to make her the legally registered chief executive of the primary shell company holding the laundered syndicate millions. If the Sovereign Treasury ever audited the firm, Julian would walk away untouched while my daughter faced life in a maximum security prison. The sheer malice of his design was breathless. He needed her back under his control to maintain the shell structure and ensure she never spoke to legal counsel. If she attempted to fight the civil suit, discovery would expose the offshore accounts, causing his syndicate bosses to execute him for risking their operation. Julian was a desperate, cornered rat, and desperate rats resort to ultimate violence. Knowing we needed to force his hand publicly, I suggested to Adeline that we make a brief journey to the town's central apothecary and market arcade. It was a calculated risk, but I needed to draw Julian into the open. As expected, while Adeline was browsing an aisle of medicinal herbs, Julian materialized from the shadows, his face twisted in desperate rage. You think you can ignore my demands? He hissed, cornering her against the wooden shelving. You think you can hide in the countryside with your pathetic old parents? I told you, you are coming back to Mayfair tonight, or I will ensure your family dies in the gutter. I rounded the corner immediately, letting my shoulders drop, my knees quiver, and deliberately knocking a basket of dried lavender to the stone floor to announce my presence. Please, my lord. I whimpered, pitching my voice into a trembling, terrified squeak as I shuffled forward. Do not harm my child. Take my carriage, take my land, but spare my daughter. Julian let out a booming, arrogant laugh, stepping away from Adeline to face me. Look at you, he mocked, towering over me. A weak, Pathetic old fool who cannot even keep his hands from shaking. You think you can stop me? You are nothing. I staggered forward, reaching out a trembling hand to clutch at the deep pocket of his heavy wool overcoat. Please, I begged, letting tears well in my eyes. I will do anything. Get your filthy hands off me, you old beggar. Julian barked, shoving me violently in the chest. I allowed the full momentum of his push to throw me backward, landing hard on the cold marble floor, groaning in dramatic agony as if broken. Adeline screamed, dropping to her knees beside me, while Julian stood over us, laughing maniacally before shouting his final ultimatum, midnight tonight. Send her back, or I burn your estate to ashes. As his heavy boots echoed away toward his carriage, Adeline wept against my shoulder. But the moment the arcade doors closed, my trembling stopped entirely. The pain in my eyes vanished, replaced by icy calculation. I sat up smoothly, brushing the dust from my coat. What she did not see, what Julian never realized, was that during my clumsy struggle against his coat, my fingers had executed a flawless sleight of hand honed over 30 years of undercover operations. Deep inside his coat lining now rested two microscopic pieces of Crown Intelligence technology, a miniature location beacon and a high-frequency audio transmitter. I had just placed a sovereign leash around Lord Julian Whitcomb's neck, and every word he uttered from that moment onward was being recorded by the Crown. Returning to our estate, I locked myself inside the study, donned heavy brass listening headphones, and tuned the frequency receiver to the device in Julian's pocket. The audio feed was crystal clear. I listened as Julian slammed into his luxury carriage, breathing heavily, and immediately placed an urgent call through a private line to his offshore syndicate handler in Malta. The arrogant bully who had shoved me to the floor was gone, in his place was a terrified, stammering coward pleading for time. The handler's voice was devoid of human warmth. He informed Julian that 5 million sovereigns were currently trapped in the Nevada holding accounts, awaiting laundering. If the funds were not cleared within 48 hours, the syndicate would send a specialized execution team to dispose of Julian permanently. The line went dead, and I heard Julian screaming in absolute, unadulterated panic, pounding his fists against the carriage interior. That recording was the final nail in his coffin. I immediately transmitted the encrypted audio file, along with Corbyn's shadow ledgers, directly to the High Commander of the Sovereign Marshal Service in London. Simultaneously, Sir Ellis Vance presented the evidence to a High Court judge, securing an emergency national security injunction. Within 20 minutes, every single bank account, shipping asset, and property title associated with Julian Whitcomb was frozen solid by Crown authority. His financial arteries were completely severed. Continuing to listen through the headphones, I heard Julian arrive at an elite London dining club. He ordered a double cognac, attempting to calm his shattered nerves, before presenting his corporate credit card to pay the bill. I heard the waiter return moments later, his polite tone replaced by cold suspicion. "I am sorry, my lord," the waiter stated. "This card has been declined." "Declined?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "That is absurd. Run it again." "I did, my lord. The issuer reports that all accounts associated with your name have been subjected to an immediate total asset freeze by order of the Sovereign High Court." Julian scrambled frantically through his wallet, throwing down personal credit notes, but every single one was rejected. Panic seized him like a physical hand around his throat. He fled the establishment, sprinting to his carriage, and called his chief accountant. "What is happening?" Julian screamed. "Why are my funds frozen?" "My lord," the accountant stammered, terrified. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has levied an emergency audit. The Nevada Shell Company, the one under Adeline's name, has been seized. Every penny is trapped." Julian dropped the receiver, hyperventilating as the walls of his reality caved in. Seconds later, his secondary private phone rang, the syndicate handler. "We have received notice of the SEC freeze," the handler stated with chilling finality. "You exposed the pipeline. You have until midnight to recover the capital and eliminate the registered officer, or the cleanup protocol will be initiated. The line disconnected. Julian sat in dark silence, weeping hysterically. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. But a cornered animal is unpredictable. His terror quickly mutated into violent paranoia. Believing Adeline had betrayed him to the authorities, he reached for his phone and typed a final, lethal ultimatum: "I know what you did. I am coming to the estate tonight. No authorities, or everyone dies." I removed the headphones, a cold smile crossing my face. The trap was set. The beast was bleeding, and it was about to charge headlong into the abyss. Stepping into the living room, I found Adeline staring in mute horror at her glowing phone screen. "Dad," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "He has a pistol. He is coming here tonight to kill us all. We must pack and flee immediately." I placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "We are not running, Adeline. Are you mad?" She cried out. "He is desperate. He will murder us where we stand." Marlene stepped forward, her voice filled with quiet, absolute authority. "Listen to your father, child. He wrote the rules to this game." Walking over to the library bookcase, I pressed the hidden latch, swinging open the concealed wall to reveal the steel alcove lined with glowing tactical surveillance monitors displaying high-definition night vision feeds of our entire perimeter, the oak woods, the driveway, the iron gates. Adeline gasped, stepping back in shock. What is this?" I reached into a locked steel box on the desk and pulled out a solid silver star encased in a heavy brass ring, deeply engraved with the royal crown. Setting it firmly on the table, the silver caught the gas lamp light. "United States High Marshal," she read, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, what were you?" "I earned that star over 30 years of tracking down the most violent fugitives on Earth," I told her quietly. "I was not a quiet paper pusher, Adeline. That was the story we told you to keep your childhood safe and normal." "Your father was a high marshal operative," Marlene added gently. "He hunted cartel lords, international arms traders, and men who believed they were gods. He lived in frozen mountains and burning deserts, hunting monsters who commanded private armies. And every single one of them learned they were wrong the moment your father put them in irons. Julian Whitcomb is not a mastermind," I explained to my wide-eyed daughter. "He is a spoiled, arrogant boy playing with dark money he doesn't understand. He thinks he is coming here to terrorize an old man and a defenseless woman. He has no idea he is walking into a fortified tactical perimeter designed by an apex predator. I have spent the last 48 hours stripping away every piece of armor he possessed. These monitors cover every inch of these woods. Ground sensors will tell me the exact weight of his carriage the moment it crosses the gate. I called Deputy Director Gideon Sharp of the High Marshal Service 10 minutes ago. A specialized tactical strike team is currently surrounding these woods in complete darkness. They are waiting for my signal." Adeline stared at the silver badge, then at the glowing surveillance feeds, her overwhelming terror slowly evaporating, replaced by a profound, awe-inspiring realization. The man she thought was a fragile country gentleman was a legendary hunter. "You are not a victim anymore, Adeline," I said with absolute finality. "You are standing behind a shield you never knew existed. We do not flee from wolves. Tonight, we put one in a cage." At precisely 2:14 in the morning, the silent motion alarms flashed red across the surveillance monitors inside. I sat calmly in my wooden rocking chair on the front porch, the heavy double-barreled tactical shotgun resting across my lap in the shadows, a single dim lantern casting a soft yellow glow over the wooden floorboards. The quiet rustle of the oak trees was shattered by the violent roar of a heavy carriage engine. The black vehicle did not stop at the iron gates, it smashed through them with a deafening crash of snapping chains, tearing up the gravel driveway at breakneck speed before skidding to a halt 50 feet from the terrace. The carriage doors flew open, and 3 figures stepped out into the misty night air. Julian Whitcomb emerged from the driver's seat, his velvet coat disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with unhinged, feral madness. He held a heavy iron crowbar in his right hand, his breathing coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Behind him stood two heavy-set syndicate enforcers, their hands resting on the grips of concealed firearms, hired muscles sent to ensure Julian eliminated his liability. Marching up the steps, crowbar raised, Julian shouted toward the closed front door, unaware of my presence in the shadows. "Where is she?" he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "Bring Adeline out right now, old man, or I will beat you to death and burn this house to the ground." I took a slow, deliberate sip from my tea mug, letting the porcelain clink softly against the saucer. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Julian froze, turning his head sharply toward the shadows. The two enforcers fanned out instinctively, their eyes scanning the dark. "You are precisely on time, Julian," I said softly, my voice calm, deep, and devoid of fear. "But you are making a dreadful mess of my driveway." "Where is she?" Julian roared, taking an aggressive step forward. "She is inside," I replied smoothly. "But she is not coming out, and you are certainly not going in. So why don't we have a quiet conversation before you make a mistake you cannot survive? You think this is a game?" Julian screamed, raising the crowbar. "I will destroy everything you love. You owe exactly 5.2 million sovereigns to a criminal syndicate operating out of Malta," I stated, my voice echoing with icy precision across the porch. Julian stopped dead in his tracks, his foot hovering above the third stair, all color draining from his face. "Your Nevada shell accounts were frozen 3 hours ago under a sovereign injunction," I continued, leaning forward into the lantern light. "Your offshore transfers bounced back. Your syndicate handler gave you until midnight, a deadline you received while weeping in your carriage outside a Mayfair restaurant after your credit cards were rejected." Julian staggered backward, his mouth opening in mute horror. The two syndicate thugs exchanged terrified glances, realizing instantly that this was no ordinary country home. Who are you?" Julian whimpered, his hands shaking violently. "I am the man who dropped a tracking beacon and a microphone into your coat pocket while you were busy shoving me to the floor in the Apothecary Arcade," I said, allowing a dangerous smile to touch my lips. "I am the retired High Marshal who handed your entire criminal life to the sovereign treasury." Julian reached into his coat, pulling out the tiny brass devices, staring at them as if they were lethal adders. You set me up," he choked out. "You ruined me. They are going to kill me." "No, Julian," I said, standing up smoothly and bringing the double-barreled shotgun into the light as dark-clad High Marshal operatives emerged silently from the misty tree line, rifles raised, surrounding the driveway in a flawless perimeter. "They are not going to kill you. The Crown is going to lock you in a dark stone cell for the rest of your natural life. And every single day, you will remember the old man you thought you could push around. Drop your weapons." Commander Gideon's voice boomed from the darkness. Julian dropped the crowbar, falling to his knees in the gravel, weeping pathetically as federal irons clicked around his wrists. The hunt was over. The wolf was caged. And my family was safe forever.